When Marcus looked at his phone after what felt like a 2-hour drive, he discovered that 6 hours had passed, and he couldn't remember where they had been or what they had done. Marcus Chen stood at the entrance to a rest stop outside Bakersfield, California, watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. His last ride had dropped him off 3 hours ago, and since then, only a handful of cars had even slowed down to look at him before continuing on their way. The September heat was still intense despite the approaching evening, and Marcus was starting to consider finding a place to spend the night when he heard the sound of an engine approaching. But Marcus had no idea that accepting this ride would cost him 6 hours of his life that he would never be able to remember. A white Toyota Camry pulled over about 50 yards ahead, its hazard lights blinking. Marcus jogged toward it, grateful for any opportunity to continue his journey north toward San Francisco. The driver was a woman in her 40s with graying brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail. She wore a plain blue t-shirt and had the kind of tired eyes that suggested she'd been driving for a long time. "Where are you headed?" she called out through her open window. "San Francisco, if you're going anywhere near there," Marcus replied. "I'm going right through the city." "Hop in." Marcus climbed into the passenger seat, immediately grateful for the air conditioning and the bottled water the woman offered him from a cooler in the back. "Thanks for stopping. I'm Marcus." "Janet," the woman replied, pulling back onto Highway 99. "Janet Morrison." As they drove north through California's Central Valley, Janet seemed pleasant enough, but oddly quiet. She asked a few basic questions about Marcus's travels, but didn't seem particularly interested in his answers. Her responses were polite but distant, as if her mind was focused on something else entirely. But there were subtle things about Janet that Marcus began to notice. She drove exactly the speed limit, never varying even by a mile per hour. Her hands remained at precisely 10 and 2 on the steering wheel the entire time, and every few minutes she would glance at a small device mounted on her dashboard that Marcus couldn't quite see clearly. "Long drive ahead of us," Marcus said, trying to make conversation. "About 2 hours," Janet replied without looking at him. Marcus checked his phone. It was 4:15 p.m. If they reached San Francisco by 6:15, that would be perfect timing. "Have you driven this road before?" he asked. "Many times," Janet said, but again her tone was strangely detached. As they continued driving, Marcus found himself feeling unusually drowsy. The rhythmic hum of the road, the steady temperature in the car, and Janet's monotone responses were making it difficult to stay alert. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, stifling a yawn. "I didn't sleep well last night. Do you mind if I rest my eyes for a few minutes?" "That's fine," Janet replied. "I'll wake you when we get close to the city." Marcus leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes, expecting to doze lightly while remaining aware of their progress. But when he opened his eyes again, something was very wrong. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the landscape outside. Marcus looked at his phone and felt his stomach drop. It was 10. "Janet, what time is it?" he asked, thinking his phone must be wrong. "About 10:20, she replied calmly. Marcus stared at his phone screen, trying to process what he was seeing. 6 hours had passed, but he distinctly remembered Janet saying it would be a 2-hour drive to San Francisco. "Where are we?" Marcus asked, looking around at the landscape outside. The terrain didn't look like anything he'd seen on the route to San Francisco. Instead of the familiar Central Valley farmland, they were driving through what appeared to be mountainous desert terrain. "We're almost there," Janet said, but her answer didn't address his question. Marcus looked at his phone's GPS, but it showed no signal. He tried to remember the last thing he could recall clearly. Getting in the car, Janet offering him water. The conversation about the 2-hour drive. Everything after that was a complete blank. But Janet's behavior was about to become even more disturbing. "Janet, I need to ask you something. What happened during the last 6 hours?" "I don't remember anything after falling asleep." Janet glanced at him with an expression that seemed almost surprised, as if she hadn't expected him to notice the time discrepancy. "You've been sleeping," she said simply. "For 6 hours? In the same position? People sleep in cars all the time." Marcus felt a growing sense of unease. Something was fundamentally wrong with this situation, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. "Janet, where exactly are we going? This doesn't look like the route to San Francisco." "We're taking a detour," Janet replied, her voice still maintaining that same eerily calm tone. Marcus tried to piece together what might have happened during those missing hours. Had they stopped somewhere? Had he been unconscious rather than asleep? Why couldn't he remember anything? That's when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The small device on Janet's dashboard that he'd glimpsed earlier was now clearly visible. It appeared to be some kind of timer or monitoring device, and it was displaying numbers that looked like coordinates. "Janet, what is that device on your dashboard?" "Navigation system," she replied, but Marcus could see that it wasn't any kind of GPS unit he'd ever seen before. The device had multiple screens showing what appeared to be biometric data: heart rate, blood pressure, brain activity patterns. And at the bottom of the display, Marcus could see text that made his stomach turn. Subject: Marcus Chen. Status: Phase 3 complete. Proceeding to final location. Marcus felt panic starting to rise in his chest. "Janet, I need you to pull over right now." "We're almost there," she repeated, ignoring his request. "Pull over now, or I'm calling the police." Janet laughed, but it was a sound completely devoid of humor. "Your phone doesn't work out here. We're in a dead zone." Marcus checked his phone and confirmed that he had no signal. They were in the middle of nowhere, it was dark, and he was trapped in a car with someone who had apparently been monitoring his vital signs while he was unconscious. But Janet wasn't finished revealing the scope of what was happening. "Marcus, you volunteered for this. You signed the consent forms." "I have no idea what you're talking about. I never signed anything." Janet reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a folder. Inside were several documents with what appeared to be Marcus's signature on them. Experimental sleep study. Memory suppression research. You agreed to participate in exchange for transportation to San Francisco. Marcus stared at the documents. The signatures looked like his handwriting, but he had absolutely no memory of signing them or agreeing to any kind of research study. "This is impossible. I would never agree to something like this." "The memory suppression worked better than we expected," Janet said with what might have been satisfaction. "You don't remember the briefing, the consent process, or the initial tests we conducted during the first 4 hours of the drive." Marcus felt like he was trapped in a nightmare. According to Janet, he had willingly participated in some kind of medical experiment, but he couldn't remember any of it. "What kind of tests?" he asked, dreading the answer. "Memory manipulation, consciousness suppression, behavioral modification through targeted electromagnetic stimulation." Janet gestured toward the back of the car, and Marcus turned to see equipment that he hadn't noticed before. Devices that looked like they belonged in a medical laboratory, not a passenger vehicle. But the most disturbing revelation was yet to come. "Janet, what's the final location? Where are you taking me?" "The research facility where you'll undergo the complete memory reset procedure." "Memory reset?" "Complete elimination of your memories from the past 24 hours, including this conversation. You'll wake up tomorrow morning at a bus station in San Francisco with no recollection of how you got there." Marcus realized he was facing something far more serious than a simple abduction. This was organized, systematic, and involved technology he didn't understand. "Why me? How did you find me?" Janet pulled out a tablet and showed Marcus a profile that contained detailed information about him: his travel patterns, his habit of hitchhiking, his lack of fixed address or regular check-ins with family. Ideal subject profile: young, healthy, travels alone, minimal social connections to notice a temporary disappearance. The profile contained information that should have been private: his college records, his family's contact information, even details about his hitchhiking routes over the past year. You've been watching me for 3 months. We needed to understand your patterns before making contact. But Marcus was about to discover that he wasn't the first person this had happened to. How many others, he asked. Janet consulted her tablet. You're subject 24/7 in the current study phase. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. There had been at least 246 other people who had gone through whatever he was experiencing. What happened to them? Successful memory reset and release. They all continued their travels with no knowledge of their participation in the study. Marcus tried to imagine 246 other hitchhikers who had lost hours or days of their lives without knowing it, who had been subjects in medical experiments they couldn't remember consenting to. This is illegal. This is kidnapping and assault. Actually, it's not, Janet said, showing him more documents. You signed consent forms that authorize the research. The memory suppression is part of the experimental protocol you agreed to. But Marcus wasn't going to accept that explanation. Even if I did sign those forms, which I don't remember, I have the right to withdraw my consent at any time. Not according to the agreement you signed. Withdrawal would compromise the scientific integrity of the study. Marcus realized he was dealing with people who had found a way to conduct human experimentation while maintaining a veneer of legality through manipulated consent and memory suppression. Who's funding this research? That's classified information. Where is this facility? Also classified. Marcus looked out the window, trying to get his bearings. They were driving through what appeared to be desert mountains, but he had no idea which state they might be in. The missing 6 hours could have taken them anywhere. That's when Marcus noticed something that gave him an idea. Despite Janet's claims about being in a dead zone, he could see cell towers in the distance, and while his phone showed no signal, he noticed that Janet's tablet was receiving data updates. Janet, if we're really in a dead zone, how is your tablet getting internet access? Satellite connection. But Marcus had spotted something else. A small cellular signal booster device plugged into the car's power outlet. Janet was blocking his phone's signal while maintaining her own connectivity. Marcus realized that if he could disable the signal blocker, he might be able to call for help. I need to use the bathroom, he said. We'll be at the facility in 20 minutes. I can't wait 20 minutes. Janet looked annoyed, but pulled over at what appeared to be a rest area. As they stopped, Marcus noticed that they weren't as isolated as Janet had made him believe. There were other cars in the parking area, and he could see lights from a small town in the valley below. Make it quick, Janet said. Marcus got out of the car and walked toward the restroom building, but instead of going inside, he ducked around the corner and quickly called 911 from a position where Janet couldn't see him. His phone worked perfectly. But what happened next would reveal the true scope of what Marcus was up against. 911 what? What's your emergency? I'm being held against my will by someone conducting illegal medical experiments. I'm at a rest stop on... Marcus looked around for location markers but realized he still didn't know where he was. Sir, can you provide your location? Marcus was about to respond when he heard footsteps behind him. Janet had followed him and was holding what appeared to be a small device pointed in his direction. Hang up the phone, Marcus. 911, my name is Marcus Chen, and I'm being... The device in Janet's hand emitted a high-pitched sound, and Marcus felt a wave of disorientation wash over him. His vision blurred, his coordination failed, and he dropped the phone. The neural disruptor is calibrated specifically for your brain patterns, Janet explained as Marcus struggled to remain standing. We mapped your neural responses during the initial testing phase. As Marcus collapsed to the ground, he could hear the 911 operator's voice calling his name through the phone, but he couldn't respond. Janet picked up the phone and spoke to the operator. False alarm. My friend has been drinking and thought it would be funny to call 911. Sorry for the confusion. She hung up and helped Marcus back to the car, where the disorientation gradually faded. The neural effects are temporary, Janet explained, but they demonstrate why resistance is futile. But Marcus's call had accomplished something Janet didn't realize. Although the call had been cut short, 911 systems automatically trace all incoming calls. Even a brief connection would have provided authorities with location data and the partial information Marcus had managed to provide. As they continued driving toward the mysterious facility, Marcus began to notice something else. Janet kept checking her tablet with increasing frequency, and her previously calm demeanor was showing signs of stress. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked. "Minor logistical issue," Janet replied, but Marcus could see alerts flashing on her tablet screen. What Marcus didn't know was that his 911 call had triggered an automatic investigation. When police tried to call the number back and found it was registered to someone who had been reported missing by his family, they began taking the situation seriously. The missing hours in Marcus's memory hadn't just been about medical experimentation. They had also been about establishing an alibi for the people conducting the research. But Janet's operation was about to face its biggest challenge yet. As they crested a hill, Marcus could see flashing lights in the valley ahead. Police cars were blocking the road leading to what appeared to be the research facility. "What's happening?" Marcus asked. Janet's facade of calm finally cracked. "There's been a security breach." She turned the car around and began driving back the way they had come, but now her driving was erratic, nervous. "Janet, whatever this research is, whatever you've been doing to people, it's over. Turn yourself in. You don't understand. This research is too important to stop. It's human experimentation without real consent. It's illegal and immoral. We're on the verge of breakthroughs that could revolutionize treatment for PTSD, depression, traumatic memory disorders. The potential benefits justify the temporary inconvenience to subjects like you." But Marcus wasn't buying her justification. "You can't just erase people's memories and conduct experiments on them without their knowledge. That's not science, it's abuse. Every medical breakthrough requires sacrifices. Early anesthesia research, vaccine development, surgical techniques. They all involved subjects who didn't fully understand what they were participating in. Those subjects consented to known risks. You're conducting secret experiments on people who don't even know they're subjects." As they argued, Janet's tablet began receiving more urgent alerts. Through the windshield, Marcus could see helicopters with searchlights beginning to sweep the area. "Janet, it's over. Pull over and surrender." But Janet made a decision that would put both their lives at risk. Instead of stopping, she accelerated and began driving recklessly through the mountain roads, apparently trying to reach some kind of escape route. "Janet, you're going to get us both killed. The research data is more important than individual lives." Marcus realized he was trapped in a car with someone who had become completely disconnected from normal moral reasoning. The research project had consumed Janet to the point where she viewed human beings as expendable resources. As they careened around mountain curves at dangerous speeds, Marcus made a decision of his own. He grabbed the steering wheel and forced the car to pull over to the side of the road. Janet fought him for control, but Marcus was younger and stronger. The car skidded to a stop on the shoulder, and Marcus immediately got out and began running toward the police helicopters he could see in the distance. Behind him, he could hear Janet shouting about the importance of the research, about the potential benefits to humanity, about the need to complete the study. But her words were lost in the sound of approaching sirens. 20 minutes later, Marcus was sitting in the back of a police car, giving his statement to FBI agents who had been tracking the illegal research operation for months. "Mr. Chin, you're the first subject who managed to maintain enough memory of the experience to provide testimony," Agent Patricia Lewis told him. "What about the other 20? We're working to identify them and assess what was done to them. But the memory suppression techniques were apparently very effective. Most subjects have no recollection of their involvement." Agent Lewis showed Marcus a map covered in pins representing locations where other subjects had been picked up. "This operation has been active for over 2 years, targeting vulnerable travelers across the western United States. But the investigation would reveal something even more disturbing. Mr. Chen, the research wasn't being conducted by any legitimate medical institution. It was a private operation, funded by individuals who wanted to develop memory manipulation techniques for non-medical purposes. What kind of purposes? Corporate espionage, interrogation techniques, witness tampering. They were essentially developing tools for erasing inconvenient memories. The scope of what Marcus had stumbled into was far broader than illegal medical research. It was the development of technology that could be used to manipulate justice, democracy, and truth itself. What happens to Janet and the others involved? Janet Morrison, whose real name is Dr. Jennifer Walsh, is facing federal charges for kidnapping, assault, illegal human experimentation, and conspiracy. The facility we raided contained evidence of connections to several other illegal research projects. But perhaps the most important question was about Marcus's own condition. Agent Lewis, what about my missing memories? Will I ever get them back? Our medical consultants believe the effects are permanent. The 6 hours of memory from this afternoon are gone forever. Marcus had to accept that there was a portion of his life he would never be able to remember. Experiences that had been stolen from him by people who viewed him as nothing more than a test subject. The investigation that followed became one of the largest cases of illegal human experimentation in recent history. Over 300 victims were eventually identified. Though most retained no memory of their experiences, Marcus's case became crucial to the prosecution because he was one of only a few subjects who had recovered enough memory to testify about what had happened. During the trial, the full scope of the operation was revealed. The research team had been developing what they called selective memory editing, the ability to remove specific memories while leaving others intact. Their ultimate goal was to create a tool that could erase witnesses' memories of crimes, remove employees' knowledge of sensitive information, or eliminate voters' recollections of unfavorable political information. This technology represents a fundamental threat to human autonomy and democracy, the prosecutor argued during closing statements. The defendants weren't just conducting illegal medical research, they were developing weapons against human consciousness itself. Dr. Jennifer Walsh was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. 6 other researchers received sentences ranging from 10 to 20 years. But for Marcus, the end of the trial didn't mean the end of his struggle with what had happened. The hardest part isn't what they did to me, Marcus reflects now. It's knowing that there are 6 hours of my life that I'll never get back. Experiences that were stolen from me by people who thought they had the right to edit my consciousness. Marcus continued hitchhiking, but with a much greater awareness of the risks posed by people who seemed helpful but had hidden agendas. That experience taught me that the most dangerous predators aren't the ones who threaten violence, he says. They're the ones who attack your mind, your memory, your sense of what's real. Marcus now works with organizations that investigate illegal human experimentation and advocate for stronger protections for research subjects. Every person has the right to their own memories, their own experiences, their own consciousness. No one should have the power to edit another person's mind without their knowledge and consent. The white Toyota Camry that had seemed like salvation that afternoon had actually been a carefully designed trap, operated by people who viewed human consciousness as something to be manipulated for their own purposes. But Marcus's partial resistance to their memory suppression techniques had exposed an operation that might have continued for years, claiming hundreds more victims. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to let someone else decide what you're allowed to remember. And sometimes the greatest act of resistance is simply insisting on the right to your own mind. Marcus had lost 6 hours of his life that September afternoon, but his refusal to accept that loss had saved countless others from the same fate. The missing time would always be a scar on his memory, a reminder that there are people who believe they have the right to reach into your mind and take whatever they want. But it was also a reminder that consciousness, memory, and identity are not just personal possessions. They are fundamental human rights that must be protected from those who would steal them.